It's certainly not so much about AI and robotics. You know, I'm just a fairly old man. I don't know much about that, but I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about that, right? But what I will try to do with this presentation, and thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation to be here today to say something about the economy, it will be that what you have today is very, very relevant for this economy. So otherwise, I'll just go through this presentation. It's fairly short, so that we can get to what it's really all about here today, namely sort of AI, robotics, and so forth, right? So there we are. Where are we in terms of the Latvian economy today? Sort of main, not sort of ideas, but a little bit of outline for that. There we have it again, just taken from the program, just a sort of little reminder to myself of what is it that I was supposed to be dealing with, right? And a few headlights there. And the whole thing is this year that the economy is doing very well. It's very different from 2007. There are some problems, sure. There's always problems in an economy, of course. But it's really very different from 2007, even though there's one place that looks more or less exactly the same. Right. Here we have, this is how we economists, we always have to start, right? We have to do growth rates of the economy, looking at GDP and so on. Otherwise, it's our lifeblood, basically. But, you know, let's get rid of all the numbers there. We are very familiar with this year, as also Ingemar was talking about, the big boom before the very, very big crisis. And then after that, well, quite frankly, what we have had there is a boom, not as big as before, no. But it's been there for a long time, right? The economy has been growing for more than 8 years in a row, right? And the boom or growth has been basically as long as it was back in the, I think it was called the fat years of former prime minister at the time and so on. So many people might think, okay, oops, what about now, right? 33, first quarter of 2019, when we get the numbers, will also have shown growth. So it's 34, it's close to 35. Another downturn? No. Many people talk about this here, and I've even met some people who sort of said to me, but there has to be an economic crisis coming. And I asked them, but why? Well, because it's been a long time since we had one. That's not exactly how it works. It's true the economy has a tendency to go like this here, but it's not perfectly predictable about when it goes up and when it goes down. So yes, there are sort of crises sort of brewing out there, but Latvia this time is exactly where these things do not take place. Whereas 10 years ago, Latvia was exactly where it did take place, when the big credit boom turned into a credit bust, and it really hit this economy because it was so credit-fueled at the time. There will be some crises out there, something might even be coming this year, but it's not going to hit Latvia. And if it hits Latvia a little bit, then just a very little bit, actually. We are, for once, really in a nice position. And what is it that we could look at? There is no credit boom in this country, and if there's no credit boom, there cannot be a credit bust. There's no real estate boom, also therefore no real estate bust. Even the government is doing reasonably well in terms of its public finances. There's nothing to fear there that the IMF or the EU should come again and that we need sort of grand loans for them, right? In that sense, the economy is humming along quite well. Inflation is under control mostly. If there are any problems, they're sort of out there, right? And I have no intention to go through those, but you know, usual suspects that we have there, right? People keep talking about Brexit. I'm sick and tired of doing it because it's about 3 years since those Brits voted to get out, but they still haven't found the way out, right? Is it going to hit Latvia? Very little. Some businesses, of course, if they're very exposed to Britain. But for instance, Latvian exports to Britain, it's only 5% of total exports. So even with a hard Brexit, the maximum impact on Latvia will be fairly small. Or think about this here, right? Sanctions and so forth vis-a-vis Russia, how much has that affected the macroeconomy? Very, very little. Then there are the crazy Italians, no offense and so on, right? They can cause some trouble, but I have this feeling that they will not do so, right? So we are sort of here in Latvia, located in the right place. Quite frankly, what is most important for this economy at the moment, that's what's going on in Lithuania and Estonia and Germany and Sweden and Finland. And those places are also doing quite fine. So it's very different from 2007. The economy in Latvia right now is almost everywhere balanced. Therefore, no crisis coming up. Then there's this issue, and you're all familiar with this. So in that sense, you could say, why am I here? Because you know about this here. Perhaps I can just do it a little bit differently, just provide some numbers, and also a little bit look into the future, right? The labor market is a big issue here, and the labor market is complicated because unemployment now, again, is very, very low, and I'll show some pictures for that. But as I see it, for the short run, it's the only big issue for this economy. There's also some long-run issues, but for the short run, it's the only one, right? Here also I've taken sort of the unemployment rate. We typically do it for those people who are between 15 and 74, those who would like to have a job but cannot find a job. Again, if I take those annoying numbers away, then I get the following, right? And I get, oops, that was not so good. What I get there is continued fall for the past 8 years, right? After the financial crisis, unemployment peaked there at more than 20%. It was really, really high. It exploded from super low levels to very, very high levels in just a year and a half. But since then, it's been sort of almost consistently coming down, and what we have right now is the lowest unemployment rate in Latvia for the past 8 to 9 years. And if one sort of checks, there's only that time of 2006-07, the overheating of the economy, only those 2 years saw lower unemployment rates. So we have this here, what we call a tight labor market, where it's very difficult to find people, and I'm dead certain that you know all about that from where you're working. I can go a little bit more into detail. I should be careful with a graph like that with too many things into it, right? But if I look at it around the regions of Latvia, I also get that unemployment is coming down across the board, right? Even in Latgale, unemployment has come down a lot, but also here, that's sort of the two regions where they will almost always be the lowest unemployment, namely Riga and the Riga region. There I even see that unemployment now here around Riga has come down below levels that it had before the financial crisis. So it's very broad-based. Unemployment comes down across the country. Not surprisingly, but it means also that labor markets is especially tight here in Riga and around Riga. And it's not really surprising that it's like that, but it means that it's tough for businesses that are located in this area. I could also look at this one, this so-called employment rate. So it means that how many or how big a share of the people between 15 and 74 are actually working. What we have in Latvia there, let's see, that is the blue one, so it's there. So that means it has crept up to close to 2/3. It's a very big share. So it means that 2/3 of people between 15 and 74 that they're working. That's a lot because there's also supposed to be a lot of students in there and quite a few pensioners. It's a very big share, and we can even see that that share now is bigger. It's a little bit hard to see, I know, the blue one there, but it's bigger than it was when it peaked before the financial crisis. In that sense, it means that a bigger share now of people in Latvia are working than ever before for as long as we have reliable data, which goes back to about 1996. We should see that as a major success for the economy. It's really, really nice. It's nice for the people themselves. They earn income. But it's also nice for the country itself. It provides tax revenue for the government that they certainly very quickly will spend, right? And again, we have this here, not surprisingly, right, where is the employment rates, were they the highest? It's here in Riga, and it's around Riga also, right? So really, really, really many people out there are working right now, and we should be very happy about that, unless we are HR managers, of course, because then it's difficult to find some unemployed people, right? Then nevertheless, with unemployment coming down so much, and with employment being as a share of the people in those age brackets so big, what has nevertheless happened was that, yes, we went from about 1,080,000 to 837,000 in just a year and a half, right? 240,000 jobs were lost within a year and a half. That's a huge share. It's more than 20% of jobs that vanished in just a year and a half. And that never, ever came back, right? Today, even though unemployment is super ultra low, there's just about 900,000 people working. It also means that Latvia will never, ever look like this here again, just 10 years ago, with more than 1 million people. As things are developing, there will never be 1 million people working again, right? So it means that super, super tight labor market. What happened to those people, we all know it. They migrated, or due to demographics, they have left the labor market and fewer people have come into the labor market. Right? So again, this is story. Many people are working as a share of the employment, but relatively few people are working as compared to 10 years ago. And this year will never improve. We will never ever come back to a level like this year. Labor is super scarce in Latvia, and it'll continue to be very scarce. So just sort of highlighting this here again, it is number one issue here for the short run in this country, the labor market. But quite frankly, it's also number one in the long run. Right? And here I use a little example of what if I put the Latvian population into these sort of 5-year brackets. So the very young, the kids between 0 and 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, etc. And then I've chosen 2 of the columns here, people who are between 55 and 59. There's about 144,000 of those. They should be people whom I would suspect, they're not working, all of them, of course, but very many of them are. But we should expect that in the next 5, 10 years, they will sort of retire from the labor market. 5 to 10 years. Who's supposed to replace them then? Well, that must be those who are 15 to 19. They're young now. Some of them are still in school. Some of them are in perhaps higher education. A few of them might be working. But in the next 5 to 10 years, they're sort of coming into the labor market. And certainly in 10 years, they're fully into the labor market. But what I have is this here, that I have 144,000 people leaving, and I have 86,000 people coming in only. That's a deficit of 60,000. Or, since these are 5-year groups, 60,000 divided by 5, roughly speaking, it says that the labor market loses 12,000 people per year. That's a lot when less than 1 million people are working. It means that the labor market is shrinking by 1% every single year. And since I have that this column also is larger than that column, this column is larger than that column, and let me see, must be this column is larger than that column, it means that for the next 20 years, what will happen to the labor market, labor force, is this here. It'll shrink, 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 and shrink every single year. Yes, there are measures done in order to, shall we say, increase participation and so on, increasing the retirement age. It's all very good. It's all very proper to do. But we cannot do much about this here effect. I mean, these children, they have already been born. We cannot increase the number of 10 to 14-year-olds, as far as I know, right? Yeah. So the labor market is super tight right now, but it'll continue to be tighter and tighter. Labor is a very scarce resource in Latvia, and it'll be even scarcer. And therefore, and I'm really not here to sort of sell the message of this conference, but it just coincides, this conference, very well with also what happens in the labor market in Latvia, right? This here, that if labor is very scarce, then anything, right, anything that can be done in order to create labor-saving technology, save labor from some parts of the economy to be put into other parts of the economy, is more than welcome in this here country. Right? I just pulled down a little bit about this here. I don't know much about this here, what's going to happen, but these big guys, they all say that many things will happen. Okay, I sit back then and try to find out, is it going to happen or not, right? I'm not so concerned myself as an economist. It's about that many jobs will be killed. Has always happened, right? Jobs have existed, then they have gone out of fashion again. Other jobs have been created. I have pulled down sort of a few of them there, right? I don't even know most of those things. A social media trailblazer, yeah, whatever that is, right? Little question there, how many of those exist? None of them, right? I mean, it's job creation and job losses and so on happens all the time. So I'm not scared or anything like that. Also not when the former president of the US, I'm not so sure whether he's a big expert on AI either, right? But at least he thinks that 50% of jobs could be replaced by robots. I have no idea, quite frankly. I think it's perhaps a little bit overrated, but let's see, right? But for this country, it's actually not a problem, right? I can understand if some people in some countries are concerned about robots or technology taking over their jobs. If you're living in Italy or in Greece or in Spain, where unemployment is very high already, then if machines will come and take your jobs and create more unemployment, that's a problem. But here in Latvia, we are so few working, and there's so high demand for labor, and unemployment is so low that everything that this year can do should be extremely welcome, quite frankly. And also, yeah, I had to Google this here, so-called leapfrogging, as we like to speak about in economics, right? So again, we just need these kind of technologies because the labor market will forever be very, very tight in this country. So whatever can be done here is extremely welcome. It is something that enhances productivity, right? And if it enhances productivity, it can also sustain higher wages. And there is already, as we know, perfectly well wage pressure in this country, which is very good also. Employees definitely do not complain about that. It's only the other side of the market, right? But if this here is possible, and now I'm being a little bit overly optimistic, or shall we say hopeful, right? If this is possible, then it means that it's a way to increase incomes even faster in Latvia than is already going on. Increasing incomes faster, but in a sustainable way, so that it's still possible for businesses to pay because they improve their productivity so much. And what it therefore can help with is this year, that is the other big issue for Latvia, quite frankly, still so-called income convergence, right? Here again, if we measure it income per person, we know these numbers quite well, right? If the EU average of income per person is 100, then yeah, we have to go pretty far to the right still to find Latvia. Latvia is about 67% of the EU average. It's much better than it was 20 years ago, but there's still some way to go before income convergence is full, right? And we know that quite a lot of this lack of income is also what has created migration in the first place. So again, it's a little bit like killing two birds with one stone, right? If we can, or you can, not me, right? Not me, but if you can sort of replace some labor with technology, it's very good for the labor market, but it's also very good for income per person in this country, and therefore it could actually be good for remigration. As I said, I'm very hopeful there. I'm not sure if this is going to take place in very fast, but I certainly hope that it will, right? Those are sort of more or less then the words from me, right? It's a very short view of the economy. There are no other problems at the moment, quite frankly, right? Really, I mean, macro, right? And therefore, you know, go ahead, just do it, right? And therefore now, you know, get some people to talk who actually know what they're talking about and cut away from the economist, right? Unless perhaps there is a question at the end, but otherwise, thanks a lot for your attention, and I hope that there will be some really nice outcomes of this year conference, right? Thanks a lot.